think we can go ahead and begin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Your Wallet, Your Voice, taking a stand for Palestine with Boycott, Divest, Sanction. I'm Roxanne Bruno with Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, an organization advocating for a shift in U.S. foreign policy to support human rights in Palestine and Pakistan. We're very grateful to our 9 co-sponsors. They are listed in the chat for now, and we will be thanking them by name later in the program. They've done an amazing outreach, and we are honored to be in coalition with all of them. We're thrilled this evening to welcome our expert panel. We have Riham Barghouti, BDS co-founder, Rebecca Vilkomerson, Funding Freedom co-director, and Adil Abbutalha, creator of the Boycott app, which is the official app partner of BDS. BoyCat, sorry, I automatically say Boycott, the BoyCat app. This evening, our panelists will share strategies to amplify big BDS victories like Norway's recent $3 billion divestment and divestment resolutions occurring in U.S. cities. We'll touch on how to navigate potential barriers in the current political climate, such as anti-BDS laws and accusations of anti-Semitism. And we'll try to inform you about how you can make better consumer choices within your own homes. So just a few light housekeeping notes before we get started. We will maintain an active chat. Please keep the discussions respectful and focused. Please feel free to share links that you think would be helpful to this community, and we will make the transcript of the chat available along with the recording of this webinar. It is being recorded, and we will make that available to the attendees as well. We will have a panelist discussion with prepared questions, followed by questions and answers from the participants. So please hold your questions and submit them in the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and selected questions will be answered after the panelist discussion. And before we dive into the questions, just a very, very brief introduction for those of us who are not as familiar with BDS. It is a non-violent global campaign inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle. And its purpose, through economic and cultural pressure on Israel, is the threefold goal of number 1, ending Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. Number 2, ensuring full equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel. And number 3, respecting the right of return for Palestinian refugees. Our first panelist question is for Riham Barghouti. Riham is a Palestinian American educator and activist based in New York. She co-founded the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel and is a co-founder of the BDS movement. And thank you so much for being here with us, Riham. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the BDS movement you helped to found. Could you please tell us how the movement has been impacted by the genocide in Gaza? Tell us about some of the movement's divestment wins and some of the challenges that the movement is currently facing.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity to be with you. I want to begin just by talking first about Gaza. And I think that Gaza has made it glaringly clear what all of us as Palestinians have long maintained, that Israel's settler colonial apartheid regime really aims to ethnically cleanse the indigenous people of Palestine from our homeland. And the world is witnessing Israeli practices of mass destruction, bombing of homes, schools, universities, hospitals, refugee camps, water and sewage systems, the targeted killing of medical personnel, journalists, mass killing of civilians, including tens of thousands of children, and forced starvation, which has reached the level of famine, according to multiple UN agencies, and most recently, the Integrated Food Security Phase classification. On Monday, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the largest professional organization of its kind, joined Palestinian, international, and Israeli human rights organizations in determining that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. And Israeli officials have been blatant about the purpose of this whole-scale genocide. At the same time, in the West Bank, settler violence continues to increase unabated as the Israeli army carries out incursions in all major Palestinian towns and cities. Violent Israeli settlers are setting up makeshift settlement homes, confiscating huge tracts of Palestinian land, burning Palestinian property, killing and injuring any Palestinians who attempt in any way to defend their homes. Gaza has also made it glaringly clear the complicity of the US and European governments who, through their arms supplies, their economic agreements, their diplomatic cover, are not just enabling the Israeli genocide, but are blatantly undermining all tenets of international law and their own domestic laws. And this has galvanized millions of people around the world to take a stand in solidarity with Palestine, to protect whatever shreds of international law and humanity that is possible in the face of atrocities that we are witnessing in Gaza. The level and scale of solidarity is unprecedented, with huge protests, demonstrations, media, legal campaigns, disruptions to government and civil and corporate agencies, and of course, the targeted boycott, divestment, and sanctions initiatives that are being carried out. Just to cite a few examples, you've already mentioned the Norway Sovereign Fund, the world's largest funds, which have not just divested, but divested from Israeli bonds. And that's very important, as have the United Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church in the US, as well as divested from other complicit companies. Trade unions have affirmed their support for BDS actions, including the American Federation of Teachers, which announced its complete divestment from Israeli bonds, and a United Auto Workers-led contingent of 7 unions representing some 6 million workers came out in support of a US arms embargo against Israel. We are seeing universities worldwide, particularly in Europe, North America, Latin America, and Africa, that have cut academic and/or financial ties with Israel and its complicit institutions. We've seen tens of thousands of cultural workers, and most recently over 7,000 writers and publishers that endorsed the cultural boycott of Israel. Just last week, the Venice Film Festival witnessed massive protests calling for an end to the Israeli genocide, one of the largest protests at a mainstream film event. And in addition to that, governments in the global south, like Colombia, have enacted trade sanctions, energy embargoes, and/or military embargoes against Israel. Israeli officials also this past week were banned from the UK's leading arms fair. So we see that BDS has played a key role in several divestment initiatives. It played a role in Intel's decision to scrap a $25 billion investment in Israel. And even here in the belly of the beast, as we say, where Israel enjoys its staunchest allies, a resolution by Bernie Sanders to block assault rifles was supported by 27 senators, and a resolution to block bomb shipments was supported by some 24 senators. Now, I'll be the first to say that it is absolutely shameful that these resolutions were not supported by 100 senators in the face of the atrocities that we are witnessing. However, the fact that 27 signed on to what in effect is sanctions against Israel is totally unprecedented, and we have to understand that. And this is really indicative of the moment that we are in. We are obviously not where we want to be. We are not where the Palestinian people need us to be, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. Only those with very explicit ties to Israel, whether they be ideological, political, or economic, can continue to maintain their stalwart support of Israel in the face of this first ever live-streamed genocide. Now, the BDS movement obviously is facing many challenges here in the US, anti-BDS legislation and legal actions against boycott initiatives government and corporate attacks on BDS activists and organizations, attempts to silence organizers, deport Palestinians and Palestinian solidarity activists, doxing campaigns, especially targeting students and academics, challenging the status of 501c3 organizations that support Palestinian solidarity and or BDS, and obviously, ultimately, major accusations of anti-Semitism, this conflation of protests against Israeli genocide with anti-Jewish racism, which is being addressed by many principled Jewish anti-Zionist leaders. And I'm sure Rebecca will talk more about this later on. And then this ongoing US mainstream media, which continues to reiterate such false narratives put forward by Israel without questioning it, despite the fact that there's overwhelming evidence of Israel continuously lying about everything since before October 7th. However, through the courageous efforts of Palestinians on the ground, it has become possible to not only understand what Israel is doing, because people are bearing witness every day, but the overwhelming majority of humanity is standing on the right side of history. They're attempting to find ways to mitigate our complicity, their complicity, through boycott, divestment, and sanctions. According to the BDS movement, we have never been as close as now to imposing a comprehensive and effective sanctions regime. Ever more states and municipalities are moving forward to impose partial sanctions and review ties and contracts. The global majority today stands clearly with Palestinian liberation, and even in states that are Israel's partners in genocide, like the US, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, among others, today the majorities view Israel negatively and support Palestinian rights. They are moving forward an informal but not less impactful isolation of Israel. We need to channel this potential energy into building a critical mass of people power that can compel complicit governments, corporations, and institutions to end their complicity. I'll end with that.
Thank you so much, Riham, and that it's heartening to hear so many of the positives among what you said. And I think, I personally need to latch on to some of that good news. It's like finally, there is some good news. Thank you so much for that. Our next question is for Rebecca Vilkomerson. Rebecca is co-director of Funding Freedom, which organizes philanthropy for Palestinian liberation. She previously led Jewish Voice for Peace for over 10 years and currently serves on JVP New York City's leadership team. Rebecca also co-founded the In Our Name Fund for grassroots Palestinian organizing. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, Rebecca. Critics are labeling the BDS movement as anti-Semitic. That is the word that we hear so much in all forms of media today, that is just everywhere. We are even hearing that the BDS movement is a threat to Israel's very existence. As of this year, 2025, 38 US states have passed controversial anti-BDS laws or executive orders that so far only require government contractors to certify that they won't boycott Israel or its settlements. I think we all fear that the push will be for more than just government contractors. So, Rebecca, what strategies have you found effective in countering claims that BDS is anti-Semitic? And how can activists navigate anti-BDS laws while keeping the focus on Palestinian human rights?
Thanks so much, Roxanne, and thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be with so many of you. It's wonderful to see you all here tonight. And I think I'll pick up where Riham left off. And I just want to say it very simply, that criticizing a state, any state, for committing war crimes and crimes against humanity is not anti-Semitic. Taking action in protest against Israel's genocide being enacted against Palestinians with your purchasing or your investment decisions is not anti-Semitic. And that critics are calling BDS a threat to the existence of the state of Israel when Israel has literally destroyed Gaza, its buildings, its universities, its schools, its sewage and water systems, its mosques, basically its entire infrastructure is really a distraction and frankly like a bad faith attack. And I think we need to understand it that way. And, to be honest, it feels like a really fraught question to even spend energy on right now when we need to be keeping our focus on the genocide in Gaza and on the increasing attacks in the West Bank. So anti-BDS laws and laws like the IHRA that define anti-Semitism so broadly that even talking about the conditions of apartheid and genocide and anti-ethnic cleansing that Palestinians are facing right now, defining that as anti-Semitic, having those conversations, is a tactic that pro-Israel forces have been using since at least 2016 to suppress supporters of Palestinian liberation in the United States. And I saw a question in the chat about challenges to the anti-BDS laws, and I can put in the chat later. Palestine Legal does a really good job of tracking those laws, and they have indeed been challenged successfully in many states, including, I believe, in Connecticut. And I do understand why you need to ask this question, because it comes up so often and it's so often weaponized against the BDS movement. But I want to just resist and really encourage you all to resist the premise of the very idea that BDS, which targets the state of Israel, is anti-Semitic and not to be drawn into those arguments. I think at this point, they are really not actually worth engaging in. And to be honest, in these last almost 2 years, I see BDS tactics as a pretty gentle response to the genocide, considering the ferocity of the destruction that Israel has unleashed upon Palestinians. And so I just think it's really important right now for us to be unapologetic in our advocacy. And when our government, to our shame and horror, is not only not taking action to stop the genocide, which it could have done, let's be clear, basically with one phone call, our government is not only not stopping it, it is making it possible by supplying weapons to Israel and by providing Israel with diplomatic cover. So when our government isn't taking action, it's our responsibility to find ways to not only express our horror about what is happening, but to do it in ways that are strategic and effective, which is what BDS campaigns are, because they affect companies' bottom lines. So I think we're in a stage again where the best response to these kind of critiques is to be loud and proud and strong about supporting BDS. Like I said, I believe there is not an anti-BDS law in Connecticut, which is amazing, and I would imagine is a result of work of probably many of the people on this webinar. But regardless, I think it's important to say that just like the actions of ICE or the many rogue actions that the Trump administration is calling legal, that doesn't make them right. So, of course, I understand that contractors may need to make decisions to protect their businesses, and I don't want to downplay the serious consequences that individual activists and organizations are facing that Riham talked about earlier. But I don't think that we in the movement should be intimidated by what are clearly unconstitutional laws, and we shouldn't soften our stances to accommodate them. And I think the last thing I want to say is that Israel really wants to claim that it speaks and acts for all Jews. And that is deeply dangerous and also, of course, untrue. And like Riham said, anti-Zionist Jews all over the world support BDS and support Palestinian liberation. So the accusation that BDS is anti-Semitic actually flattens and ignores the range of Jewish experiences and perspectives and is in itself actually, and ironically, anti-Semitic. And the very last thing I'll say is that anti-Semitism is rising in this country, and the perpetrators of that anti-Semitism are largely the same people who are vociferously supporting Israel. So white nationalists and white power groups. Real anti-Semitism, which targets Jews for being Jewish, not that target Israel, that target Jewish people, must of course be fought against. And the BDS movement and the Palestine Solidarity movement have been very principled in speaking out against anti-Semitism where it exists. But that should not stop us from calling for BDS as strongly as we need to in this moment.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, but I really need to ask you a quick follow-up. So, I mean, I totally totally understand what you said, and it makes tremendous sense. And I think that for those of us who are not Jewish, who do not follow the Jewish faith, who become accused of anti-Semitism, I just wonder what is a good way to respond. What I have been saying is that I am absolutely pro-Judaism. I am an anti-Zionist, and I try to explain to people that I believe Zionism is a form of political government, not any form of religious belief. And I mean, is that an okay thing, Rebecca, for people who are not part of the Jewish faith community? Is that an okay thing to say? Or, I mean, to just entirely ignore it is sometimes really difficult, especially when we're not of the faith.
Yeah, I appreciate that question and I appreciate your sensitivity to people's concerns. I think there are two things that I would say. One is what I started out by saying, which is that Israel is a state, and every state can be criticized, and every state it's okay to take action against, especially one that is committing war crimes. And there are many, many, many Jews who are fiercely critical and support BDS. And so to conflate Israel with the Jewish people is just simply inaccurate and is a blanket excuse that has been exactly what has allowed us to come to this moment. The years of excuse for Israel and the fear of being called anti-Semitic, because Israel, to be clear, has been very strategic about trying to say that it speaks for all Jews. That's what has led us to this moment. I would also say, and again, you have to say this in your own words and from the perspective of your own community, but it's important, I think, to note that Judaism has existed for thousands of years, and the Zionist movement has existed for about 150 years. And
Yes.
from the moment that Zionism has existed, anti-Zionism has also existed inside the Jewish community. And Zionism as a concept was fiercely fought over within the Jewish community, and huge swaths of the Jewish community were fiercely against it for the very reasons that unfortunately we're seeing today. It's an ethno-nationalist project. It's a settler colonial project. It's very much of its time. It came about in the late 1800s when settler colonialism was the ruling,
Right.
you know, standard of the day. So it comes from that time, and I think it's widely understood that the time of settler colonialism should have passed by now, and that I would say for myself as a Jewish person that I feel that it honors my own ancestors to be anti-Zionist and to be strongly anti-Zionist. And so that's why I really encourage people, again, like you're saying, I understand the concern about being careful, but to make sure that you're bringing those histories and that reality into any conversations that you're having. I hope that answers.
That's very powerful. Thank you for that. That's really very powerful. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Rebecca. And our next question now is for Adil Abbutalha. Adil is the founder of BoyCat, the values-driven app enabling millions of people to align purchases with causes like Palestine. And Adil, BoyCat transformed shopping into resistance for the BDS movement, which is just absolutely amazing. And since launching in January of 2024, BoyCat, which is BDS's exclusive app partner since November of 2024, has empowered 2.7 million users to divert over $300 million from brands complicit in Israel's occupation. That is absolutely amazing, Adil. Can you briefly tell us how you came up with the idea for the app and walk us through how it works? So when a user scans a barcode, what kinds of ethical insights do they get? How do these choices collectively divert millions from companies complicit in oppression?
Oh man, thanks so much, one, for having me, and then that great introduction too. I really appreciate it. Um, but I think before we even jump into like the how it works and like the impact, I think it's important to understand the why and like what really brought up the idea of it. Because I think it's not that I'm special, the team is special, or the idea itself is very special. I think it's just that we understood the why and we took the first steps to kind of build something out. And I think it all originated realistically because we basically realized, like, a couple weeks in, that we needed something more than just a call, like a call to boycott, right? We wanted to build something, or we just needed some infrastructure that really made it easy for the everyday person just to act on their values in the moment. Because the reality is like 5% of people will really, really care about Palestine and Gaza. 5% of people really, really hate you no matter what. But can you convince the average person in the middle, that 90%, to spend a little extra time thinking about it? And if they aren't convinced off of, the millions of videos and images and, atrocities they see live, can you convince them in any other way to do the action you need them to do? And I think it was more of like a technical aspect of like, can we create the infrastructure and unite people globally? Because we have the power of social media, we have the power of technology, we have resources. We know, like, especially Gen Z is very good at exposing and sharing information and moving in that direction. For the most part, we know they're going to be the next generation of big spenders. But it really just came down to the core question of, how can an individual in any part of the world play a part in this? Like, you feel so hopeless, you feel so helpless. What can I do to help? The second part was, why aren't corporations and why aren't governments listening to the millions of people speaking out about this genocide? And the reality is they speak the language of money and we speak the language of words. And so you have to empower the individual to understand how to speak the language of money, collectively unify them, and then you could actually have a seat at the table where decisions are made. I think there's numerous governments, there's a couple of governments that own a large percent of, for example, US bonds, for example. If they were to even not just sell those bonds, but threaten to sell those bonds, that would tank the US economy so fast where that phone call would happen, where it would end everything right off like the bat. But we just don't have the economic pressure to make that happen. And so for me, it was really big to allow that to happen, to get a seat at the table. But, if you imagine this ideal perfect world of, if we had 40 million people, 50 million people onto a platform, onto an idea where you could go to any corporation, any government, be like, look, if you don't change your stance on Palestine, if you don't stop supporting this, Israeli government, we can tell them all to avoid your product, and that would tank their mini economy. On the flip side, if you're able to tell a company, hey, thanks for supporting us, we're going to tell other people to buy from you, it's going to boost their economy. And a lot of corporations, and the reality is, they all care about profits. If you can drive profits in a direction, it's a very powerful thing. But we have to get to that point, and it's step by step. It's like the dream end goal. But for us, it was, all right, let's build towards the direction. Let's solve three main problems, and then we'll get into how it really works. And so the three problems we wanted to solve was, can we educate the average person without relying on the media cycle? Because we know the moment the media ends, people will forget. It's evident in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria back in the day, all these different things around the world. It's like the moment the media stops reporting, people stop caring. And so can you create a way that allows them to continue to do so? The second is, for the average person, and even for people that do really care in general, it's a lot easier to avoid something when you know what you can get instead. Like if there's 10 options on the, at a store, or 10 options online, you're looking for the next, podcast, software, or next browser or VPN or whatever. If there's a clean option, it's easier to avoid all the bad ones as long as you know about it. And the third one is the hard part, but consumerism is habitual, and like that's the reality. Like, you buy things out of habit, you go to a store, you buy the exact same thing, and you don't ever think about it. But if you can change those three and solve those three problems objectively, you can objectively solve the problem of how people move money and how you can direct those things, and you can have the back end effects of political agreements, you can have the back end effects of having corporations support your causes, and so on from there. Yeah, and so the story's out there quite a bit of times now, but basically just taught myself how to code, built the app, got a team together, and then we just kind of all put together in like 2 months basically. Launched, and then thankfully we were on the news for quite a bit, got fired. Then thankfully BDS picked us up, and it was great, and then kept growing, and it was really funny. So in February this year, we were doing really well. Like, we were starting to announce, I think, 200 something mil divestment. We just passed 2 million users, and right around the time, Israel launched a $150 million Hasbara fund. And with that, what happened was we started getting a bunch of offer letters to buy out our company. And we had some lawyers look into like the more legit looking ones, which weren't very legit, obviously. Like, we did a deep dive into the company's histories and stuff. They're all slush companies that were founded in Tel Aviv. They were just, government slush companies that tried to buy us out for some crazy amounts of money. like enough to basically retire, family, friends, and everything like that. And then same time, it's all part of their propaganda plan. And yeah, I mean, we know it's successful because they're feeling it and they're trying to buy us out and they're trying to shut us down, right? So we know it's effective. But the entire concept of BoyCat and kind of how it works right off the start, it's more than application. It started off with an application where you can scan a barcode and search for brands and get the latest news and track your own divestment within an application. But what you get was basically any information, any public ties, some of our data that we've been able to scrape and collectively unify through community sources to prove that this company or this entity is tied to the Israeli government or supporting the genocide that's happening around the world or in Gaza. And yeah, and so we just try to basically point you in the right direction. We never tell you explicitly like don't do this, but we kind of be like, this isn't compliant with your values, you should really avoid this and go in that direction. But yeah, that's been the past 2 years almost.
So thank you very much for that. I have just a few follow-up things to ask you. So I was not previously familiar with the app. And so I went ahead and I downloaded the app and I thought, okay, let me see. I'm going to start in 2 main rooms of my house. I'm going to pick a few things that I use all the time in my kitchen and my bathroom. And I was really stunned. I had no idea. And it's like the things that I happened to check were like category 2. Um, uh, yeah, and then so what I did was I loaded the app, I did the scan barcode and went, oh my goodness, I had no idea and I need to make changes. And so it found those things and it told me they were, category 2, which are there 3 categories of like offensiveness? Basically, like category 1 is like the worst offenders, category 2 is, pretty bad, category 3. And it listed some alternatives that I could use instead. And then I baffled it with one kitchen product. So I buy some foods from an Arabic food store, and I scanned a barcode of something I didn't know. And I was very surprised to see that it asked me to help correct that gap. So I was hoping you could tell our users a little bit about that because, thinking that um, collectively we can all make a difference like that and help a base of data grow to achieve a goal for all of us is like super exciting. So if you could tell us how that works. So I scanned something and I'm going to be honest, it was pickled lemons. I really like pickled lemons, and it was a brand that was unknown. And so I was asked to provide a little bit of information. And now what happens next? What happens behind the scene?
Yeah.
What will happen to my record that I submitted?
Let me just quickly explain the levels as well too. So level 1, level 2, and level 3 are 3 levels that we have. Level 1 is the only one that's endorsed by the BDS movement. They're basically the main targets that the BDS really wants to hit. So basically,
Okay.
our goal is everyone has a different capacity of how much they can actually boycott. The reality is like most things that you own, most things you have, most things you use, they're all somewhat connected. There are some people that may live in very populated areas that have the opportunity to buy alternatives very easily. On the other hand, there are people in less fortunate areas that just have to make a decision basically if there's only 2, like Burger King and McDonald's, which one do you pick, right? And so our goal is to make them allow them the ability to pick the lesser of the 2 evils every time. So the higher the level you pick, the more strict you want to be. Level 1 is all the BDS targets, and we work with them every month to update those. Level 2 is another effective level that we believe is important as well, where it's the major parents and major subsidiaries of those companies. And then level 3 is anything with there's like a threshold of involvement. So for example, if Vanguard owns like 15% of a company, we put it into level 3. But if they own less than a certain threshold, then we don't, because if we have a 0 threshold approach, then 99% of things that we'd scan, use, whatever, is all connected to them in the end of the day. So we have a threshold system. And also with alternatives, they're also all community submitted. They're also not endorsed by the BDS movement. They're not allowed to endorse that. So it's really important to distinct. But for us, we're allowed to use the community support. And I think it's really important because BoyCat isn't just for the people, it's built with the people. Like if a barcode isn't in our system, like you said, we flag for review, we request you to submit it, so then you can get points and you get cat treats in the application. You can get rewarded. Then we go and research and verify and add it into the system. So it gets auto added the next time you do scan it. It checks into our database of any variation of the name that could be connected to a brand that we've researched, and then it gives you the information after that. And then eventually we come back later and we go manually verify everything that's submitted by users as well. Our entire thing is allow users to submit products and suggest alternatives, so that way, like, BoyCat is not just an app, it's like a collective database of resistance, and it continues to grow around the world. Everywhere we've been able to visit and create events and host these things, we start seeing big uptake. And like, I was in Switzerland like a couple weeks ago, and a bunch of now Swiss products are in there. I was in Japan, I was in Malaysia, Singapore, and now you start seeing different hubs of people putting in information and brands. And now people are getting educated on different involvement of different companies around the world.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. That's very powerful. Thank you for answering that. I wish we had 2 hours for the webinar, but we have a few more questions that we want to cover, plus some Q&A, but thank you so much for that awesome answer. Riham, our next question is for you, and this is one that this one makes me really happy. I had like a few minutes of pure joy last week. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which is the world's largest at $2 trillion, divested from Caterpillar and 5 Israeli banks for enabling settler violence and violating human rights in Palestine. And Norway did this, interestingly, by framing investments in these banks and companies as fiduciary risk. How can we leverage this strategy for future wins, and which institutions like state pensions, city treasurers, universities, faith-based investors do you think are the most likely to divest next in the BDS campaign?
So thanks for that. I want to start by saying I was active in an organization called Adil in New York, the campaign for the boycott of Israel for many years. And one of our targets at the time was a company called Africa Israel, which had been complicit in building settlements in the West Bank, but also mining diamonds in Namibia and carrying out various labor violations and so on. And I actually went to Norway in 2010 and met with the Norwegian Ethics Board, Pension Funds Ethics Board. And they were very clear about their mandate. And they said, just provide us the proof, pretty much, of the violations of international law, and we will divest. And within a few months, we worked with the Norwegian People's Aid, we worked with the BNC, we worked with Who Profits Inside Israel. We were able to get them all of the information that they needed, images of the constructions on the ground, settlements, and so on, that Africa Israel had carried out. And within months, the Norwegian Pension Fund divested. And at the time, they also said it was for fiduciary reasons. They will provide that, but we really know that certain areas, certain countries, certain groups, certain faith-based groups are, if you provide the information, the facts, that a particular company is violating international law, is violating their country's laws as well, they will carry out these actions. I think we have to understand this within the scope of understanding the shift that Gaza has caused, right? As brutal as what is happening on the ground right now is, as horrendous as the atrocities are, there's a shift in the global order right now that is happening, and we are part of that shift, right? So as a result of the US-backed Israeli genocidal war, there's a clear shift in the balance of power. You have the overwhelming majority of countries in the UN right now, they see Israel as a rogue state. The Israeli prime minister is wanted by the International Criminal Court. The UN has overwhelmingly voted for sanctions against Israel for the first time in 42 years, back in September of 2024, with the deadline being this September 18th for Israel to end its occupation.
Wow.
Yep, 52 states have called for a military embargo on Israel. And of course, the International Court of Justice ruled in January 2024 that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. And in July of 2024, that the occupation is illegal and Israel is practicing apartheid. This is the international arena that we are in. And these developments reflect a major shift, a rising global south, and a willingness for the first time to hold Israel accountable that we have not witnessed before, not to these levels. So Israel is increasingly isolated in the international community. The taboo of criticizing Israel, and more importantly, holding it accountable using BDS has been broken. And further, as we can see by this decision by the Norwegian Pension Fund, Israel's genocidal war is having a major economic impact on Israel and on companies complicit in Israelis' genocide. So Israel's economy has been deeply impacted, right? They're at a near junk credit rating, 90% drop in investments in Israeli startups, a drop in investments in Israeli startups, and they are going through skyrocketing debt. And there's no doubt that the BNC and its allies, with their targeted and strategic campaigns, have helped to accelerate Israel's descent into what we call a shutdown nation. In fact, the chairman of the Israel Export Institute has admitted that BDS has changed Israel's global trade landscape. There are numerous campaigns that exist right now against Microsoft, Reebok, Chevron, Cisco, HP. There are broad campaigns calling for no tech for apartheid, targeting the technology sector. There are campaigns to establish apartheid-free zones that are being very active in Spain and in Italy. And you can go to the BNC website. You can find out more about these campaigns, as well as a number of grassroots campaigns that the BNC has endorsed. And here in the US, we see the work of groups like the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, AROC, Jewish Voice for Peace, Adil Justice Project, the American Friends Service Committee,
Yes.
enacting so many different initiatives and campaigns that run the span of BDS, the spectrum of BDS. Of course, also the amazing work of the Boycott app. There is also the American Friends Service Committee divestment tool that helps provide people with legitimate information about ways to, companies and products to boycott and divestment targets. And then in addition to that, we see in the US a number of affinity groups that have come out, like Writers Against the War on Gaza, Theaters, Workers for a Ceasefire, Dancers for Palestine, the group I work with, which is Amplify Palestine, that have supported the expansion of cultural boycott in the US. So I think what comes next is really up to everyone that is in this forum, right? It's this idea of how to work to end our own complicity in the form of the nonviolent BDS tactics, whether it's against states, it's corporations, institutions. This is the most effective, not to mention the most ethical form of solidarity that people can carry out. It also enables us to counteract somewhat the harm that our country is doing, that this country is doing, as it uses our tax dollars to violate international law and US laws. And towards that end, the PNC, the Palestinian BDS Movement Coordinating Body, has called for a global weekend of action from September 18th to the 21st, including an escalation of boycott campaigns, launching strategic intersectional campaigns to compel institutions, whether it be city councils, universities, trade unions, hospitals, etc., to adopt ethical procurement investment policies. And this has been a major focus of the BNC, is that to ensure this kind of intersectional, broad-ranging campaigns, we could work with many groups that are working on social justice issues and try to get city councils, for example, to adopt ethical procurement and investment policies. Once these policies are applied, it would exclude companies that are knowingly and persistently involved in grave human rights violations, particularly war crimes or crimes against humanity. And this will inevitably impact Israeli and international companies that are complicit and profiting from Israeli genocide. So that's really the kind of forward-thinking strategic move that the BNC is working towards. And like I said, the price Palestinians are being forced to pay right now is beyond what any people really should have to endure for liberation and self-determination. But it's an international struggle. We see it as an international struggle against colonialism, against racism, against oppression. And Palestinians on the ground are not stopping. They won't stop resisting. So we must also continue. And just to finish with, I think what enables Palestinians to continue to fight, to remain steadfast, to remain samidun, is the strength of being part of this human community, is seeing all of this work that is being carried out globally, understanding that we have the support of the vast majority of humanity, the knowledge that we are on the right side of history, and the conviction that we will soon celebrate a Palestine that is free.
Thank you, Riham. I'll just share that I have a large family in the occupied territories, and I will share that they follow my social media posts. They never post and they don't respond, but they follow the posts, and it is a way of really keeping hope alive to see what the world is trying to do. So thank you for that. Some more good news. This question is for Rebecca. This is, to me, more uplifting news, a bright spot in the gloom. At least 8 U.S. cities, including Portland, Maine, Iowa City, Iowa, Richmond, California, have passed divestment resolutions. A few weeks ago, the Medford, Massachusetts City Council voted to pass something that they called the Values Aligned Local Investments Ordinance, which divests city funds from companies contributing to human rights violations in Israel's war on Gaza. And this includes weapons manufacturers. And these resolutions are driven by advocacy from groups like BDS and, as Riham was mentioning, AFSC and others. How can activists draw on these local successes, alongside the big global wins like the Norway's $3 billion divestment, to build effective campaigns for divestment in, I'm going to say, our own communities? I know I want to try it in my town. Like Medford, Massachusetts is not all that far from me. And, if they could do it, I can do it. So,
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's like so smart about the BDS movement is that it really acts kind of like a boomerang, like different campaigns build upon one another and gather strength from one another. And that encourages collaboration and information sharing, which helps build a sense of global community. And then locally, it's exactly like you're saying, like by choosing a target in your own community that makes sense in your own local context, you can really build coalitions and partnerships and build power. And I think that's, what the goal of the BDS movement is. It's not the boycotts or the divestment itself. It's the ultimately to change, force Israel to stop what it's doing, and building power is a really important part of that. And so we need to be thinking about that too. And I think the BNC, I think I'm not tracking the chat very well, but I can put it into the chat if it's not there already. But the BNC, which is the governing body of BDS, does have these suggestions of priority targets that I know Adil talked about. But they also, I think, very smartly leave a lot open so that local activists, who are, of course, like the experts on their own local context, can make the decisions about by taking that context into consideration when they're making decisions about who to target. But I think the important thing to do is to choose a target and to do a campaign. It's not just a matter of like doing a little bit of boycotting here and a little bit of boycotting there. It's a matter of like escalating actions that help build education about what Israel is doing and brings people into action to stop it. New York State, for example, has been working on a Break the Bonds campaign, which is to try to force the state pension fund to divest from Israeli bonds. And so I don't know, for example, if you all in Connecticut have an active Break the Bonds campaign yet, but that would be something that, as neighbors could be a place to consult and collaborate. I think, there could be research that could be done locally about choosing one company to target, like Chevron or HP, and figure out, what other cities and towns have headquarters or factories or locations, or maybe where companies' board members live. It's possible that one of the priority companies that BDS is targeting is headquartered in Connecticut. I know Connecticut hosts a lot of big companies. So that's the sort of thing that's great to research. So we can, the that you can look at that through the target list. And there's a number of like support organizations that are really helpful. The AFSC, like you mentioned, has a divestment screen. The research organization Little Sis, which I can also put in the chat, has databases and offers trainings in research and in power mapping. So it's just important to do that research, not just like on what is happening in your state, but what campaigns and coalitions may already exist, and whether you need to start something new or join one that is already working or that sort of thing. I know there's already great campaigns happening where you all live. I think Roxanne and Riham, you basically covered what I want to say about the momentum for a fiduciary argument. But I did want to like highlight very briefly that here in New York City, Comptroller Brad Lander, who is against the BDS movement and is a liberal Zionist, he was targeted though recently because his office decided not to reinvest in Israeli bonds. And in the letter that he offered in response, he really put out kind of beautifully the fiscal argument for not investing in Israel. And I just wanted to share one quote. He goes into some of the details about it, but he says, "You appear to be asking that the city's pension funds treat Israel better than all other countries. That would be politically motivated and inconsistent with fiduciary duty." So we can really make, that case now that you all were talking about it being financially irresponsible. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that like you can make the case that these investments are illegal. Like now that there's a consensus among experts
Yes.
and human rights organizations that Israel's enacting a genocide, you can say that we have a responsibility to international law and you're putting your own pension funds at risk by violating international law. And I think the more funds that make the decision to divest or not to invest, like the easier it becomes to make those arguments. Um, and just the last thing I'll say is just about sharing tactics, because I do think a lot of expertise has been built not just in the last couple of years, but in the last couple of decades. And I think in particular groups like the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights and JVP that have chapters across the country and are often have a lot of internal knowledge about tactics and ways to build these campaigns are really great resources for sharing the ways that various like local groups have seen success.
That is really awesome. Thank you so much. And I will show a screen in our conclusion, but Community Alliance for Peace and Justice has put together a little page with an action card with links to the US CPR divestment kit and the American Friends divestment kit and the BDS Find a Movement link and some other resources, links to all of our co-sponsors. So I will show that. And it is really awesome to have those very mature resources that can be shared like that. So it's really wonderful that everyone is speaking about the same resources and we have those ready to share with everyone too. So thank you so much for that. I did have one more question for Adil, and I accidentally asked it in the first question, but not to worry, but I'm going to put a lot of pressure on you to answer this in 1 minute. I'm sorry, but in 1 minute, if you can please tell us about the safety of the BoyCat app. So activists in high-risk regions may be relying on the app, or really any of us activists may be relying on the app. How does the app ensure like data safety and data privacy while we're supporting BDS, which may not be the most popular thing at the moment?
In 1 minute, the shortest answer is we built it with really strict data minimalization and privacy safeguards. So basically it means we have like almost a zero log policy on your in-app stuff. It's only used for like performance crashes, for weird bugs, or when you submit information, we only track that. We don't track anything about location data, like any extra external stuff on that end.
So it's encrypted, secure, and you're not worried about data breaches.
Yeah, nothing can happen. And even if it does happen, we automatically delete any of our logs anyways. And so you're safe.
Okay, thank you for that. And that was like only 30 seconds. So that really concludes the prepared questions that we had for the panelists, and we're going to move into some audience Q&A that has been submitted while we've been meeting, and my co-moderator, Sarvat Patel from Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, will also be helping to make our way through selected questions through the Q&A. We are trying to end by 8:15 just to be respectful of everyone's time, and we do have a brief conclusion to share. So with that, Sarvat, I believe, has the first question prepared from the Q&A.
Thank you, Roxanne. And I just wanted to thank Riham, Rebecca, and Adil and say what an honor it is to share this moment with you. And thank you for all the work that you have been doing. Before I ask the first question, I just wanted to address one question that was talking about, is BDS effective? And I'll let any of the panelists chime into it. But one of the comments that I wanted to make, that the fact that so many states in United States are desperately trying to pass anti-BDS law speaks to how effective this actually is, and why they are actually doing their very best to shut this process down. This question is for Riham. Riham, we shared a lot of information about local municipalities, religious organizations, or efforts at many, many different levels. And there will be a follow-up question about even health organizations. One of the questions that was posed right in the beginning is, can there be an effort which can kind of make BDS a UN initiative, or even pushing towards that, so that, keeping in mind what the ICC rulings have been, could this be adopted as a General Assembly resolution, or which then actually makes it applicable to every country that abides to its resolutions?
Yeah, so like I said, there was a resolution during the last General Assembly in September 2024 that voted for sanctions against Israel unless Israel ended its occupation and apartheid regime in the occupied territories, and obviously it did not. The problem with the General Assembly and the UN and most of these agencies, including the International Criminal Court, including the ICJ, is without government kind of backing it up and providing the teeth, they have no capacity for implementation. So they can provide the general guidelines for this. They can say that what is taking place, Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, has provided lists of companies complicit in genocide. They can provide all of the information, but we need governments to actually then apply that. And we can see how that's happening with the ICC ruling, where Netanyahu can't go some places because they will enact the ICC ruling for his arrest, whereas the US has opened its borders and happily so allowed it. Meanwhile, they are not allowing the Palestinian delegation right now to come to the UN General Assembly in this coming September. Right. So they're blocking the Palestinian delegation, which just goes to show you how upside down the world is. And this is really why the Global South is so concerned, because this is the breakdown of international law, right? If we begin to apply, and we've only applied international law and to carry out sanctions against, countries that the US opposes, but any country that's an ally of the US is allowed to do what may and will be protected from international law, then that's not really international law. And that's why there is a movement that's happening in the Global South. And that's why we need grassroots movements happening in all of these countries saying, you have to apply this now, just like Rebecca was saying. There have been these resolutions. There has been a foundation of genocide taking place. We cannot be complicit. Our tax dollars cannot be complicit. So this is where kind of the BDS movement comes in to provide some backbone to international law.
Great, thank you. Roxanne, I'll pass on. Next question.
Thank you so very much, Riham. Sarvat, I had a question ready. Did you say you wanted to ask the next one, or you would like me?
No, you should go
You
ahead.
can go ahead. Okay, this is for Rebecca. Rebecca, we have a question asking, so we've heard that a number of churches and religious groups have called for strong measures against the genocide, including BDS actions. Has there been an effort to unite these religious efforts? What do you think about putting together something to unite these religious efforts in the faith communities?
Well, the churches are not my expertise. I don't know of efforts to bring them together. I do know from working on divestment efforts with the Presbyterians and the Methodists in particular, and I should
Yes.
shout them out to say that like in 2014 was when the Presbyterians passed their divestment resolution. So this is not like new
Wow.
genocide. It's been a lot of
Yes.
work inside the churches for, well, much more than a decade. And I know there's a lot of folks who are new to this work since the genocide started almost 2 years ago. But built just to note that we're building on decades worth of work. The BDS movement started in 2005, and of course there was decades of work before then too. Um, my understanding of the way that the denominations work is that they all have their very, very different internal processes and very honestly bureaucratic internal processes. So I would find it hard to believe that you could do sort of one big push. I will say that there's, for example, the Palestinian Christian organization Sabeel, which I think has been trying to advocate with churches. And there's also a newish group called Christians for a Free Palestine, which has been trying to bring more Christian activism in support of Palestinian liberation. And then the last thing, sorry, I'm a little bit riffing off your question, but the last thing I'll note is just I think one big question is the evangelical churches because they
Oh,
are a
yeah.
huge
Yeah.
obviously the like Kufi, which is Christians United for Israel, has something like
Yes.
2 million members, which is extraordinary in a terrible way. And obviously the evangelical church are really a backbone of the Trump administration, of the Republican Party. And we also know that or not know, I think there's intimations that there's some of the same generational splits within the
Yes.
evangelical churches that there are in other communities. So I think that's a bit of a sleeping giant that I'm certainly not the one to do it, but I think that's a very interesting place to explore, trying to do some organizing because they are an enormous, enormous voting bloc in this country.
Thank you for that. That's sort of a mind-boggling thought that you just gave us there. I'm trying to process that. Thank you so much, Sarvat.
I just have a follow-up for Riham. So one of the healthcare workers who has commented here is that they have been working to isolate Israel from the international health organizations, as well as working towards impacting the bilateral ties that Israeli health organizations have with those in UK and other countries. That seems to be an extremely promising area, even for BDS, because when you have these professional organizations or unions coming out with positions based on exactly what we have discussed, I think it gives a lot of validity to the movement in itself. Can you speak a little bit to that and how, if at all, that can be incorporated into the BDS platform?
Yeah, I mean, this is what Rebecca spoke about earlier. The point of the BDS movement is it's not one overriding thing. It's initiatives that are being taken place that are context specific and in areas of expertise. So there are targeted campaigns that the BNC puts out, that they have established campaigns. And then there are a lot of grassroots organizing that happens. And the BoyCat is a very good example of that, where somebody said, I want to deal with this issue and I have the capacity to do it. And then it aligns with the BNC, so the BNC endorses it. But even if it's not a BNC endorsed campaign, it doesn't mean that it's not part of the BDS movement. Any activity, action that is in keeping with the demands of the BDS movement, that does not undermine the principles of the BDS movement, that is staunchly, anti-racist and abides by these kinds of principles, is in fact part of the movement. It's a very open and gradual process. And I think that what has made it successful is, like I was talking about, cultural workers targeting other cultural workers, healthcare workers targeting healthcare workers, academics targeting academics, is what has made this movement so broad and able to bring in a lot of people. But yeah, I think the healthcare sector is taking into consideration the devastation of the health sector in Palestine in particular is a very important and strategic point.
Great. Roxanne.
Thank you, Riham. Adil, this is a quick and likely unfair question for you, but would you consider expanding the functionality of BoyCat to possibly help people investigate banks and credit unions? Is that something that might be within the scope of the app someday?
Yeah, it's definitely on the roadmap for everything. Like our entire idea is, can we in the future create a system or ecosystem that when you do spend your money, you don't have to think about it because everything is vetted, whether it's service-based industry, whether it's if you're looking for a plumber or electrician in your area, it's a lawyer in your area that supports the right things you support, and then moving into like the longer generation or longer other expectations of like investments and banking and so on from there. Because we know that the banking industry is, if we could get everyone on the right path for that, that would turn the tables so quickly. But
Yes,
it
it
does take
would.
time to like do the research and allow people to find the right alternatives and move in that direction. Because people aren't going to up and take all their money in one account and just move to some other bank just for fun. So it's definitely on the roadmap, but when we'll see it, it'll probably be within the next year or so.
Oh, that's excellent. That's a surprisingly excellent answer. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Sarva, do you have,
Yes.
maybe we have time for one more question?
Yes, and so I'm going to try and squeeze in two. We have so much
Okay.
wonderful. I'm going to do a quick follow-up with Adil. Adil, there was a wonderful comment that said that when every one of us as a consumer uses your app and make a really profound decision, we're no longer going to buy this, and we switch, obviously the impact is seen on bottom line. But is there a possibility of adding a feedback feature where each of those decisions, if the person who's using the app so chooses, can trigger an email to that company saying, listen, I would have bought your product, but is this for this reason that I'm not?
Yeah, that's also on the roadmap for the next, I think 6 months is going to be a thing.
Awesome.
We're just trying to hit critical mass on certain targets first, so then it's effective when we do send the email. So it's not just like, 10,000 people sending it. It can be like 1 million people at once type of thing.
That's great. And then I guess the last question I will ask Rebecca to address this. There was a comment earlier on, a question actually, that was speaking to, is BDS effective? Has it had an impact on Israel's economy? And even speaking about if the founder has an Israeli citizenship. I spoke a little bit to the effectiveness, but would you take this question on and give us your perspective?
Well, I might want to pass this question on to Riham as the person who's the real BDS inside BDS person. But I mean, I think it clearly is effective. And I guess what I want to say is that we are in a very, very frustrating moment, and a very hard moment. And that hard moment has lasted 2 full years already. And those 2 full years are coming after decades of hard moments. But I think in particular, since October of 2023, as we've seen the incredible destruction of Gaza just continue apace, even as we've seen the movement against it, I think the people of the world understand that this is a genocide and are horrified by watching it being live streamed to everyone. And I actually think that the movement against the genocide and for Palestinian liberation has been like creative and steadfast and disciplined and organized and is like doing a very, very, very good job of keeping this at the forefront of sort of the global conversation. Obviously helped by the just like devastation and horror of the images that are coming out of Gaza. And I think it's very hard that we're trying so many things and nothing has worked yet. And so it's sort of easy to say like this, how do we know if this is working? How do we know if that is working? But the point is we have to be trying everything. And, BDS is pulling on a long history of many movements that have used boycotts and divestments and sanctions as a way to move the needle, and in particular when governments won't take action. So I think it's a tool that fits the moment. And I also want to say, if that's not your thing, great, go organize a direct action. Go, like, there's a million different things there's flotillas that are sailing right now. Like, there's just a million different things that you can do. And I don't think we can say that any one tactic or any one strategy is going to be the thing that ends a genocide. I think we know that we are up against, as somebody said in the chat, like the very forces of imperialism that are exceptionally strong. Like, we're up against a very, very, very strong enemy. And so we all need to be trying all the different things, and everyone should find the thing that they think fits their skills and interests and abilities, and do that the very, very, very best they can.
Absolutely. I think that's very well said. It's
The only thing that I would just add to that, I mean, the effectiveness of the BDS movement, again, we're not seeing it in results on the ground, as Rebecca, which is all for us very devastating. But the Israeli government, as early as 2014, named BDS as an existential threat to Israel. So they tell us how effective we are being. We don't have to state it.
I think that's a very well made point. And I think for me, even if I didn't know anything about BDS other than what I had read, the reason it spoke to me immediately is I saw so many efforts on part of our legislators trying to make laws against it. And usually when that happens, that's a signal to me that, you know what, something is effective and they're actually fearing it.
Yeah.
So I completely agree.
And if could I just add one, sorry, if I could just add one more thing. I think it's also just very important to point out that this is the thing that Palestinians have unified to ask us for globally. Like, it's the largest coalition of Palestinian organizations that goes along a very, very, very wide range. This is the ask of global solidarity, and certainly not saying don't do other things, but it's saying that this is a tool that we're asked there, that we are being asked to use. So I think that's, very important for us as allies, those of us who are not in Palestine, to take into consideration.
That's an excellent point, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. We are going to conclude with a few final thoughts. First of all, thank you to all of our panelists, Riham, Rebecca, Adil. Thank you so very, very much for being with us. And I would like to briefly share my screen to show a resource that Community Alliance for Peace and Justice has put together. And I am sharing that now. Let me move this out of the way. So we will make this page live on our website. We will be sending an email that has both the recording as well as the transcript for the chat. We also will put up this page, so you will be able to watch the recording. We have resources. Many of the resources that were discussed are listed in a resources document, and we have an action card. We have many of the things that we discussed during this webinar. You can use a link to get the BoyCat app. We have the American Friends Divestment Toolkit, the US CPR Toolkit, the Norges Bank Investment Management Ethical Exclusions methodology link, and we have a link to help you find a group to join a BDS coalition, which is, a theme that has come up over and over again. At this time, I do want to thank our co-sponsors by name, and these are all clickable links on their logos. We are all actively doing as much as we can to support Palestinian liberation. And I will start with Center for Nonviolent Solutions, Connecticut Palestine Alliance, Connecticut Democratic Socialists of America, and these are in alphabetical order, by the way, the Green Party of Connecticut, Healthcare Workers for Palestine, Connecticut, JVP New Haven, Maroof, Connecticut, Middle East Crisis Committee, and Worcester Multi-Faith for Palestine. I do, while I'm on this page, want to point out that Community Alliance for Peace and Justice does bring these webinars to everyone at no cost. we do have a donate button everywhere on our website, and we would ask, every little bit helps us to continue to put programs like this together. And so we appreciate any considerations in that regard. I will stop sharing the screen now, and I just will thank everyone again. And that is the conclusion of our webinar tonight. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.